responses from ministries of labor to COVID-19, sharing over 420 measures taken to protect workers, employment, and income. Likewise, the Inter-American Teacher Education Network series, Teaching STEM in Quarantine, provided 117,000 teachers with key tools to continue advancing STEM education during the pandemic. Through its network and platforms, the Inter-American Committee on Ports promoted international and national best practices, guidelines, protocols, and recommendations on COVID-19 safety measures and continuity of logistic operations. Initiatives such as the Education in Times of Change platform allowed us to meet urgent needs by offering timely tools on virtual education and a dedicated space for ministries to share strategies, actions, and solutions. Other programs such as the Row Fund stepped up, providing emergency grants to offset the challenges imposed on our students by the pandemic. SETI's partnerships are adding value to member states in the form of technical assistance, training, and access to tools and services. In partnership with leading private sector institutions, we offered micro, small, and medium enterprises access to online tools and training, increasing their visibility and participation in e-commerce, a key to their survival and growth in the pandemic and post-pandemic era. A new OAS SETI Facebook initiative provided 85,000 MSMEs across the region with capacity building opportunities and WhatsApp business tools to aid response, recovery, and resilience building. The Caribbean Small Business Development Center's program achieved real impact, supporting new businesses, expanding sales, and driving growth. A new network of Caribbean SPDCs will broaden the program's reach. The Inter-American Committee on Tourism, the C2, convened ministerial-level policy dialogue in an urgent response to the impact of the pandemic on the hard-hit tourism and hospitality sectors. Policymakers and experts discussed biosanitary protocols, travel and visa facilitation, among other critical areas for the sector's recovery. Partnering with the George Washington University and the U.S. Bureau of Indian Affairs, we went ahead with the scheduled first Indigenous Tourism Forum of the Americas, pivoting to a virtual format and convening over 240 participants from indigenous communities, the private sector, and governments. SETI also integrated sustainable development practices in the COVID-19 response. The pandemic is a daily reminder of the links between water, health, sanitation, food security, and nutrition. We ensured the continuity of our water management projects in the Plata Basin and worked with governments and partners in the design of an investment portfolio valued at $90 million. Additionally, the Energy and Climate Partnership of the Americas continued to share relevant best practices and responses to the pandemic on energy and air quality. These few examples indicate our collective impact. We cannot do this alone. It is now more urgent than ever to address the region's structural weaknesses, to recover from the health, economic, and social crises occasioned by the pandemic and prepare for future shocks. It is imperative that we work together as we risk losing recent development gains and seeing millions fall back into poverty. It is time for the region to redirect course and pursue a more sustainable, resilient, and equitable future for all. We are in this together.
But the resilience building agenda is too big for any one stakeholder to address acting alone, and simply bringing together stakeholders, whether at the national, subnational, regional, or global level, is not enough. Effective, focused, and sustained coordination among stakeholders is paramount to provide countries with integrated and comprehensive support.
The OAS, as a hemispheric forum and honest broker, must continue to facilitate this process while we work with member states towards the attainment of the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. Cooperation, collaboration, and partnerships that include all actors strengthen us, enabling us to be more than the sum of our parts. We can and we must work together. The future of our region depends on it.
Bueno, la CIM tiene una agenda enorme en el tema de democracia y de liderazgos. El primer ámbito tiene que ver con la gobernanza electoral. para que esta gobernanza electoral responda a las necesidades con las que fue creada, y es buscar los espacios de redistribución del poder. Después hay un programa interamericano sobre el liderazgo de las mujeres, donde generamos conocimiento y también tenemos cursos de capacitación. Hay un poderoso curso que ha llegado a más de 1,000 mujeres con más de 15 ediciones, que es para candidatas electorales, en las cuales conversamos con ellas, pero también nos ponemos en una agenda de solidaridad y articulación y alianzas entre las mujeres, a pesar de las múltiples diferencias ideológicas o de partidos políticos. También hablamos de los temas de violencia política, porque no es lo mismo llegar que quedarse, y la violencia política es una forma de ejercicio de disciplinar a las mujeres para que vuelvan al mundo de lo privado y enfrentar la violencia, hacer buenas investigaciones, buenas leyes que permitan sancionar la violencia política. Es parte de las aspiraciones de la CIM en este programa de liderazgo de las mujeres. La aspiración histórica de las mujeres es estar en el mundo de lo público, que nuestro trabajo sea remunerado y que tenga un reconocimiento. COVID ha puesto en evidencia una profundización de las brechas existentes para el logro de este objetivo. Estas brechas existentes ahora dan cuenta de que podríamos tener un rezago de más de 2 décadas en el mundo laboral, que el cierre de brechas que se previó que podía tardar 100 años en cerrarse, ahora se habla de 135 años para cerrar la brecha entre los hombres y las mujeres. Entonces nuestro objetivo es que miren el derecho de las mujeres al empoderamiento económico, que el statement "quédate en casa", que es un viejo conocido del patriarcado, no sea que nos quedemos en casa siempre, y que entendamos que la inserción de la mitad de la población, de este talento humano que tiene una serie de ventajas competitivas, es necesario para el crecimiento económico. De manera que la CIM está colocando esta realidad, está colocando las necesidades de las mujeres y está haciendo unas recomendaciones de rutas para poder cumplir con el derecho al empoderamiento económico y con el crecimiento económico que requieren nuestras empobrecidas economías en tiempos de COVID.
Esta organización es el guardián regional en defensa de la democracia, la libertad y los derechos humanos. Los países se han comprometido con estos valores a través de instrumentos legales como la Carta Democrática Interamericana, la Convención Americana de Derechos Humanos y todas las demás convenciones interamericanas. Nuestro trabajo es mantener los más altos estándares. Debemos ser objetivos, analizar los hechos, denunciar cuando veamos corrupción, inequidad o amenazas a la libertad. En esos casos no podemos ser neutrales.
More than 100 years since the inauguration of this building, the OAS headquarters, our institution still brings together the peoples of the Americas to address our responsibilities as a partnership of nations. As we look to the future, our work must also focus on the construction of a positive agenda that continues to favorably impact millions of lives every day.
The COVID-19 pandemic brought unprecedented challenges to our member states and the people we serve. In response, the OAS Secretariat for Integral Development adopted a three-pronged approach by 1. Adjusting our portfolio of existing projects, 2. Exploring new projects to meet emerging needs, and 3. Expanding multi-sectoral partnerships. The results achieved in 2020 demonstrate the resilience of our member states and the commitment of the OAS SETI to work with member states and partners towards our common goals in the development of our region. Our Network on Competitiveness launched the COVID-19 Ideas Accelerator, sharing 250 tools, health solutions, responses, and recovery plans. The Network for Labor Administration published a portfolio of responses from ministries of labor to COVID-19, sharing over 420 measures taken to protect workers, employment, and income. Likewise, the Inter-American Teacher Education Network series, Teaching STEM in Quarantine, provided 117,000 teachers with key tools to continue advancing STEM education during the pandemic. Through its network and platforms, the Inter-American Committee on Ports promoted international and national best practices, guidelines, protocols, and recommendations on COVID-19 safety measures and continuity of logistic operations. Initiatives such as the Education in Times of Change platform allowed us to meet urgent needs by offering timely tools on virtual education and a dedicated space for ministries to share strategies, actions, and solutions. Other programs such as the Row Fund stepped up, providing emergency grants to offset the challenges imposed on our students by the pandemic. SETI's partnerships are adding value to member states in the form of technical assistance, training, and access to tools and services. In partnership with leading private sector institutions, we offered micro, small, and medium enterprises access to online tools and training, increasing their visibility and participation in e-commerce, a key to their survival and growth in the pandemic and post-pandemic era. A new OAS SETI Facebook initiative provided 85,000 MSMEs across the region with capacity building opportunities and WhatsApp business tools to aid response, recovery, and resilience building. The Caribbean Small Business Development Center's program achieved real impact, supporting new businesses, expanding sales, and driving growth. A new network of Caribbean SPDCs will broaden the program's reach. The Inter-American Committee on Tourism, the C2, convened ministerial-level policy dialogue in an urgent response to the impact of the pandemic on the hard-hit tourism and hospitality sectors. Policymakers and experts discussed biosanitary protocols, travel and visa facilitation, among other critical areas for the sector's recovery. Partnering with the George Washington University and the U.S. Bureau of Indian Affairs, we went ahead with the scheduled first Indigenous Tourism Forum of the Americas, pivoting to a virtual format and convening over 240 participants from indigenous communities, the private sector, and governments. SEDI also integrated sustainable development practices in the COVID-19 response. The pandemic is a daily reminder of the links between water, health, sanitation, food security, and nutrition. We ensured the continuity of our water management projects in the Plata Basin and worked with governments and partners in the design of an investment portfolio valued at $90 million. Additionally, the Energy and Climate Partnership of the Americas continued to share relevant best practices and responses to the pandemic on energy and air quality. These few examples indicate our collective impact. We cannot do this alone. It is now more urgent than ever to address the region's structural weaknesses, to recover from the health, economic, and social crises occasioned by the pandemic and prepare for future shocks. It is imperative that we work together as we risk losing recent development gains and seeing millions fall back into poverty. It is time for the region to redirect course and pursue a more sustainable, resilient, and equitable future for all. We are in this together.
But the resilience building agenda is too big for any one stakeholder to address acting alone, and simply bringing together stakeholders, whether at the national, subnational, regional, or global level, is not enough. Effective, focused, and sustained coordination among stakeholders is paramount to provide countries with integrated and comprehensive support.
The OAS, as a hemispheric forum and honest broker, must continue to facilitate this process while we work with member states towards the attainment of the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. Cooperation, collaboration, and partnerships that include all actors strengthen us, enabling us to be more than the sum of our parts. We can and we must work together. The future of our region depends on it.
Bueno, la CIM tiene una agenda enorme en el tema de democracia y de liderazgos. El primer ámbito tiene que ver con la gobernanza electoral, para que esta gobernanza electoral responda a las necesidades con las que fue creada, y es buscar los espacios de redistribución del poder. Después hay un programa interamericano sobre el liderazgo de las mujeres, donde generamos conocimiento y también tenemos cursos de capacitación. Hay un poderoso curso que ha llegado a más de 1000 mujeres con más de 15 ediciones, que es para candidatas electorales, en las cuales conversamos con ellas, pero también nos ponemos en una agenda de solidaridad y articulación y alianzas entre las mujeres, a pesar de las múltiples diferencias ideológicas o de partidos políticos. También hablamos de los temas de violencia política, porque no es lo mismo llegar que quedarse, y la violencia política es una forma de ejercicio de disciplinar a las mujeres para que vuelvan al mundo de lo privado y enfrentar la violencia, hacer buenas investigaciones, buenas leyes que permitan sancionar la violencia política. Es parte de las aspiraciones de la CIM en este programa de liderazgo de las mujeres. La aspiración histórica de las mujeres es estar en el mundo del público, que nuestro trabajo sea remunerado y que tenga un reconocimiento. COVID ha puesto en evidencia una profundización de las brechas existentes para el logro de este objetivo. Estas brechas existentes ahora dan cuenta de que podríamos tener un rezago de más de 2 décadas en el mundo laboral. Que el cierre de brechas, que se previó que podía tardar 100 años en cerrarse, ahora se habla de 135 años para cerrar la brecha entre los hombres y las mujeres. Entonces nuestro objetivo es que miren el derecho de las mujeres al empoderamiento económico, que el statement quédate en casa, que es un viejo conocido del patriarcado, no sea que nos quedemos en casa siempre, y que entendamos que la inserción de la mitad de la población, este talento humano que tiene una serie de ventajas competitivas, es necesario para el crecimiento económico. De manera que la CIM está colocando esta realidad, está colocando las necesidades de las mujeres y está haciendo unas recomendaciones de rutas para poder cumplir con el derecho al empoderamiento económico y con el crecimiento económico que requieren nuestras empobrecidas economías en tiempos de COVID.
Esta organización es el guardián regional en defensa de la democracia, la libertad y los derechos humanos. Los países se han comprometido con estos valores a través de instrumentos legales como la Carta Democrática Interamericana, la Convención Americana de Derechos Humanos y todas las demás convenciones interamericanas. Nuestro trabajo es mantener los más altos estándares. Debemos ser objetivos, analizar los hechos, denunciar cuando veamos corrupción, inequidad o amenazas a la libertad. En esos casos no podemos ser neutrales.
100 years since the inauguration of this building, the OAS headquarters, our institution still brings together the peoples of the Americas to address our responsibilities as a partnership of nations. As we look to the future, our work must also focus on the construction of a positive agenda that continues to favorably impact millions of lives every day.
The COVID-19 pandemic brought unprecedented challenges to our member states and the people we serve. In response, the OAS Secretariat for Integral Development adopted a three-pronged approach by 1. Adjusting our portfolio of existing projects, 2. Exploring new projects to meet emerging needs, and 3. Expanding multi-sectoral partnerships. The results achieved in 2020 demonstrate the resilience of our member states and the commitment of the OAS SETI to work with member states and partners towards our common goals in the development of our region. Our Network on Competitiveness launched the COVID-19 Ideas Accelerator, sharing 250 tools, health solutions, responses, and recovery plans. The Network for Labor Administration published a portfolio of responses from ministries of labor to COVID-19, sharing over 420 measures taken to protect workers, employment, and income. Likewise, The Inter-American Teacher Education Network series, Teaching STEM in Quarantine, provided 117,000 teachers with key tools to continue advancing STEM education during the pandemic. Through its network and platforms, the Inter-American Committee on Ports promoted international and national best practices, guidelines, protocols, and recommendations on COVID-19 safety measures and continuity of logistic operations. Initiatives such as the Education in Times of Change platform allowed us to meet urgent needs by offering timely tools on virtual education and a dedicated space for ministries to share strategies, actions, and solutions. Other programs such as the Row Fund stepped up, providing emergency grants to offset the challenges imposed on our students by the pandemic. SETI's partnerships are adding value to member states in the form of technical assistance, training, and access to tools and services. In partnership with leading private sector institutions, we offered micro, small, and medium enterprises access to online tools and training, increasing their visibility and participation in e-commerce, a key to their survival and growth in the pandemic and post-pandemic era. A new OAS SETI Facebook initiative provided 85,000 MSMEs across the region with capacity building opportunities and WhatsApp business tools to aid response, recovery, and resilience building. The Caribbean Small Business Development Centers program achieved real impact, supporting new businesses, expanding sales, and driving growth. A new network of Caribbean SPDCs will broaden the program's reach. The Inter-American Committee on Tourism, the C2, convened ministerial-level policy dialogue in an urgent response to the impact of the pandemic on the hard-hit tourism and hospitality sectors. Policymakers and experts discussed biosanitary protocols, travel and visa facilitation, among other critical areas for the sector's recovery. Partnering with the George Washington University and the U.S. Bureau of Indian Affairs, we went ahead with the scheduled first Indigenous Tourism Forum of the Americas, pivoting to a virtual format and convening over 240 participants from indigenous communities, the private sector, and governments. SETI also integrated sustainable development practices in the COVID-19 response. The pandemic is a daily reminder of the links between water, health, sanitation, food security, and nutrition. We ensured the continuity of our water management projects in the Plata Basin and worked with governments and partners in the design of an investment portfolio valued at $90 million. Additionally, the Energy and Climate Partnership of the Americas continued to share relevant best practices and responses to the pandemic on energy and air quality. These few examples indicate our collective impact. We cannot do this alone. It is now more urgent than ever to address the region's structural weaknesses, to recover from the health, economic, and social crises occasioned by the pandemic and prepare for future shocks. It is imperative that we work together as we risk losing recent development gains and seeing millions fall back into poverty. It is time for the region to redirect course and pursue a more sustainable, resilient, and equitable future for all. We are in this together.
But the resilience building agenda is too big for any one stakeholder to address acting alone, and simply bringing together stakeholders, whether at the national, subnational, regional, or global level, is not enough. Effective, focused, and sustained coordination among stakeholders is paramount to provide countries with integrated and comprehensive support.
The OAS, as a hemispheric forum and honest broker, must continue to facilitate this process while we work with member states towards the attainment of the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. Cooperation, collaboration, and partnerships that include all actors strengthen us, enabling us to be more than the sum of our parts. We can and we must work together. The future of our region depends on it.
Bueno, la CIM tiene una agenda.
Te escuchamos muy bien, gracias. Gracias a ti por probar.
Estamos listos con los internos.
Entonces nuestro objetivo es que miren el derecho de las mujeres al empoderamiento económico, que el statement quédate en casa, que es un viejo conocido del patriarcado, no sea que nos quedemos en casa siempre, y que entendamos que la inserción de la mitad de la población, de este talento humano que tiene una serie de ventajas competitivas, es necesario para el crecimiento económico. De manera que la CIM está colocando esta realidad, está colocando las necesidades de las mujeres y está haciendo unas recomendaciones de rutas para poder cumplir con el derecho al empoderamiento económico y con el crecimiento económico que requieren nuestras empobrecidas economías en tiempos de COVID.
Hoy, esta organización es el guardián regional en defensa de la democracia, la libertad y los derechos humanos. Los países se han comprometido con estos valores a través de instrumentos legales como la Carta Democrática Interamericana, la Convención Americana de Derechos Humanos y todas las demás convenciones interamericanas. Nuestro trabajo es mantener los más altos estándares. Debemos ser objetivos, analizar los hechos, denunciar cuando veamos corrupción, inequidad o amenazas a la libertad. En esos casos no podemos ser neutrales.
More than 100 years since the inauguration of this building, the OAS headquarters, our institution still brings together the peoples of the Americas to address our responsibilities as a partnership of nations. As we look to the future, our work must also focus on the construction of a positive agenda that continues to favorably impact millions of lives every day.
The COVID-19 pandemic brought unprecedented challenges to all member states and the people we serve. In response, the OAS Secretariat for Integral Development adopted a three-pronged approach by 1. Adjusting our portfolio of existing projects, 2. Exploring new projects to meet emerging needs, and 3. Expanding multi-sectoral partnerships. The results achieved in 2020 demonstrate the resilience of our member states and the commitment of the OAS SETI to work with member states and partners towards our common goals in the development of our region. Our Network on Competitiveness launched the COVID-19 Ideas Accelerator, sharing 250 tools, health solutions, responses, and recovery plans. The Network for Labor Administration published a portfolio of responses from ministries of labor to COVID-19, sharing over 420 measures taken to protect workers, employment, and income. Likewise, the Inter-American Teacher Education Network series, Teaching STEM in Quarantine, provided 117,000 teachers with key tools to continue advancing STEM education during the pandemic. Through its network and platforms, the Inter-American Committee on Ports promoted international and national best practices, guidelines, protocols, and recommendations on COVID-19 safety measures and continuity of logistic operations. Initiatives such as the Education in Times of Change platform allowed us to meet urgent needs by offering timely tools on virtual education and a dedicated space for ministries to share strategies, actions, and solutions. Other programs such as the Row Fund stepped up, providing emergency grants to offset the challenges imposed on our students by the pandemic. SETI's partnerships are adding value to member states in the form of technical assistance, training, and access to tools and services. In partnership with leading private sector institutions, we offered micro, small, and medium enterprises access to online tools and training, increasing their visibility and participation in e-commerce, a key to their survival and growth in the pandemic and post-pandemic era. A new OAS SETI Facebook initiative provided 85,000 MSMEs across the region with capacity building opportunities and WhatsApp business tools to aid response, recovery, and resilience building. The Caribbean Small Business Development Centers program achieved real impact, supporting new businesses, expanding sales, and driving growth. A new network of Caribbean SBDCs will broaden the program's reach. The Inter-American Committee on Tourism, the C2, convened ministerial-level policy dialogue in an urgent response to the impact of the pandemic on the hard-hit tourism and hospitality sectors. Policymakers and experts discussed biosanitary protocols, travel and visa facilitation, among other critical areas for the sector's recovery. Partnering with the George Washington University and the U.S. Bureau of Indian Affairs, we went ahead with the scheduled first Indigenous Tourism Forum of the Americas, pivoting to a virtual format and convening over 240 participants from indigenous communities, the private sector, and governments. SETI also integrated sustainable development practices in the COVID-19 response. The pandemic is a daily reminder of the links between water, health, sanitation, food security, and nutrition. We ensured the continuity of our water management projects in the Plata Basin and worked with governments and partners in the design of an investment portfolio valued at $90 million. Additionally, the Energy and Climate Partnership of the Americas continued to share relevant best practices and responses to the pandemic on energy and air quality. These few examples indicate our collective impact. We cannot do this alone. It is now more urgent than ever to address the region's structural weaknesses, to recover from the health, economic, and social crises occasioned by the pandemic and prepare for future shocks. It is imperative that we work together as we risk losing recent development gains and seeing millions fall back into poverty. It is time for the region to redirect course and pursue a more sustainable, resilient, and equitable future for all. We are in this together.
But the resilience building agenda is too big for any one stakeholder to address acting alone, and simply bringing together stakeholders, whether at the national, subnational, regional, or global level, is not enough. Effective, focused, and sustained coordination among stakeholders is paramount to provide countries with integrated and comprehensive support.
The OAS, as a hemispheric forum and honest broker, must continue to facilitate this process while we work with member states towards the attainment of the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. Cooperation, collaboration, and partnerships that include all actors strengthen us, enabling us to be more than the sum of our parts. We can and we must work together. The future of our region depends on it.
To their seats, so we may start our session this afternoon.
Afternoon, Ambassador. Jamaica.
Yes, Jamaica is present.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Up.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Madam Chair, with your permission, we will proceed to verify that we have quorum this afternoon. This is a hybrid meeting. We have delegations connected off-site, and we have many delegations here in the Hall of the Americas. Between the two of them, those connected out of headquarters and in the Hall of the Americas, we have the following delegations: Argentina, Belize, Bolivia, Brazil, Canada, Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, El Salvador, the United States of America, Grenada, Guatemala, Guyana, Jamaica, Mexico, Panama, Paraguay, Peru, the Dominican Republic, St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, St. Lucia, Suriname, and Venezuela. We have quorum, Madam Chair.
Thank you, ASG. Good afternoon, distinguished colleagues. I am pleased to declare open this regular meeting of the Permanent Council, convened to consider the items contained in the Order of Business document CP-OD 2398/22, which I hereby submit for the consideration of this Council. There being no observations, we will proceed to adopt it without amendment. Adopted. Esteemed colleagues, allow me on behalf of the Permanent Council to extend a cordial welcome to the Permanent Representative of Colombia, Ambassador Luis Ernesto Vargas, who presented his credentials to the Secretary General last Friday, September 23rd. Ambassador Vargas is a renowned Colombian lawyer, politician, diplomat, and human rights advocate who has served the Colombian judiciary for more than 4 decades, having served as Chief Justice of the Constitutional Court of his country. In 2017, Ambassador Vargas was elected Commissioner of the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, where he served as rapporteur for the rights of migrants, refugees, and victims of trafficking in persons until 2019. Ambassador Vargas, welcome back to the OAS. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. First of all, fraternal greetings to all of the permanent representatives and in general all of the members of the delegations of the OAS member states. I have and will look forward to I've been listening carefully to all of your remarks, and I will continue to do so. I am a promoter of democratic values, and this is what I seek to do. And as I may have said last Friday, I seek to be a friend of each and every one of you. As this is the first time that I have the opportunity to address the Council in my capacity as permanent representative of Colombia, I'd like to take this opportunity to share with you the perspective and the priorities in the area of foreign policy of the administration of President Gustavo Petro in the hemispheric realm. First of all, the key objective that he has set out is to achieve total peace for Colombia. We are from a country on which a war was imposed, a war that lasted more than 6 decades, the longest in the hemisphere, apart from others that we've also suffered. And the president has understood that, or he has understood total peace as the possibility of all citizens being able to live in equality with strong bases of social justice, economic justice, and environmental justice. Making a reality of total peace also would entail a change in drug trafficking, the policy with respect to drug trafficking. As President Gustavo Petro has stated repeatedly, we must be aware that the war on drugs has failed. It's necessary to move from the model of prohibitionism to the model of preventing consumption. Otherwise, we would be condemning our countries to more deaths, more prisoners, more environmental damage, more suffering. As my country embarks upon this process of building total peace, I would like, in the name of the government, to request the support of the distinguished delegations for the draft declaration to be adopted at the next General Assembly at Lima that is going to be considered in this same session to support that aspiration, which is an aspiration not only of the government, it is a strong desire and aspiration of all Colombians. We have never really known a period of lasting peace, and we really miss that. We really need that. And so I hope to be able to count on the member states of this organization as co-sponsors for this initiative, which is aimed at consolidating the Americas as a zone of peace. Second, the objective of Colombian foreign policy which I've been committed to even before taking on this responsibility, is the strengthening of the inter-American human rights system. From the mission of Colombia, we will work tirelessly and with a very collaborative spirit with you in order to achieve, as is stated here time and again, more rights for more people. Moreover, this objective is intertwined with the attainment of total peace. For total peace must also be seen as a right that synthesizes all other rights, without which it's impossible to enjoy all other rights. You can rest assured that Colombia is endeavoring to ensure the effective implementation of the American Convention on Human Rights, a document that our president, Gustavo Petro, has keenly described as the democratic constitution of the Americas, for it pulls together the key principles for the flourishing of a liberal democracy throughout the Americas. Similarly, my country is committed to all other inter-American instruments, legally binding ones, that have come about and developing the convention, which altogether strengthen the inter-American human rights system. Evidence of this is the deposit of the instrument of accession to the Inter-American Convention on the Protection of the Human Rights of Older Persons, which happened yesterday, with the participation of the country's Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs. Third, we consider that it is fundamental to go forward in attaining a sustainable and lasting future. We must make the transition to an economy that is not based on fossil fuels, but rather on knowledge and forms of clean forms of production. This is something which our president has been examining in depth, looking at the rights of the environment. We need to make sure that our lives and governments of the world strike a balance with nature. This is in line with what is provided for in the Paris Agreement. And we must make this transition so as to reflect common interests and the respective capacities in light of the different national circumstances of each country. This transition, in line with what is provided for in the Paris Agreement, should be made so as to reflect equity, the principle of common and shared responsibilities, and each country should consider this individually. In addition, it's necessary that the efforts that we make in this area be interconnected and merge with initiatives aimed at securing food security, which is another one of the major banners that we are raising up in a country that is suffering hunger among large sectors of the marginalized population of Colombia. We will undertake to protect biodiversity, especially the Amazon jungle, which is a lung for all of the lungs for humankind. And in general, we will be supporting all the aims of the Sustainable Development Goals and the 2030 Agenda. Distinguished chairperson and ambassadors, I firmly believe that these objectives should be attained by promoting plurality and diversity within the OAS, which should be the organization of integration in the Americas above and beyond ideological disagreements. As President Petro has said when he was inaugurated last August 7th, and I quote, "It is time to leave behind the blocks." The different groups and the different ideological differences to work together. There is much more that unites us than separates us. Together, we're stronger. Let us make a reality of the unity that our heroes dreamed of, our heroes such as Bolivar, San Martin, Artigas, Sucre, and O'Higgins. It's not a utopia, it's not romanticism, it is the way for us to become stronger in this complex world. Madam Chair, distinguished colleagues, I conclude my remarks by reiterating once again our full willingness and interest in participating fully with a constructive and cooperative spirit in favor not only of these objectives, but of all the initiatives aimed at bolstering the well-being of the peoples of the Americas. Thank you very much.
I now offer the floor to the coordinators of the regional groups and delegations wishing to welcome the permanent representative of Colombia. I offer the floor to Uruguay.
Muchas gracias, Presidenta. Muchísimas.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. On behalf of, well, I'll say this out of order, Argentina, Brazil, Venezuela, Chile, Bolivia, Paraguay, Ecuador, and Peru, and Uruguay. Ambassador Vargas, we give you the most cordial welcome. Your words are not just a few more words in a protocol meeting. Rather, they mean a great deal. They mean a great deal because you have placed emphasis on aspects that are very material for all of us who work here in this house of the Americas. In one way or another, you are providing a sort of reloading, and you call upon us to reflect. And that call on us to reflect by our dear and adored Colombia is very important. When you call us to engage in multilateral work above and beyond different ideological perspectives, you're right. Because, well, when you refer to democracy and the ties of democracy that are so bound up with the rule of law, the inter-American system, and the various legal systems that consolidated and provided feedback, you're right. So believe us, from the group of the South, that we feel very happy that you are here in the OAS, and you have this philosophical and outlook and a personal and professional outlook, helping us to understand that the way to build the path forward in the hemisphere is the only one in a world in which different geopolitical regimes are engaged in constant tensions and disputes. Understanding that the region has to have as interconnected a dynamic as possible, as cooperative a dynamic as possible, the most intelligent dynamic possible. Well, that is the only option we have, and you reflected it perfectly well in your remarks. So it is your arrival here is very comforting. We feel most satisfied because we also know that you're a gentleman. We know of your legal formation, your legal background, and all of that means that we now have a colleague who understands where we are and what are the difficulties we face. So you're most welcome, and your words are most refreshing for all of us. Thank you very much.
Floor to the Dominican Republic.
Muchas gracias, señora.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, dear colleagues. On behalf of Belize, Costa Rica, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, Panama, and the Dominican Republic, all of which are members of the South American integration system, we express these words of welcome to Ambassador Luis Ernesto Vargas, permanent representative of Colombia, who has over more than 4 decades of public service, has been devoted to defending and upholding human rights, both in Colombia and throughout the region. Ambassador Vargas, we are very pleased to have you as a new member of this council because of your experience, your capacity, your knowledge, and because of your sense of humor as well. From your positions in the Colombian judiciary, you have always displayed a natural inclination towards the defense and promotion of democracy and the rule of law. Your time at the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, just a few short years ago, left many most impressed and grateful because of the always cordial, respectful, and close treatment and interactions. We are certain that your pedagogical capacity, which you've developed over decades of teaching law, will mean that you will be a constructive person to engage with. You can count on us for building points of consensus and finding balanced positions so as to go forward in an agenda of development for our peoples. Once again, we receive you at your House of the Americas. Welcome. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. The delegation of Mexico warmly welcomes Ambassador Luis Ernesto Vargas as permanent representative of Colombia and celebrates this designation by President Gustavo Petro to represent his country before this organization. Ambassador Vargas's credentials as an outstanding jurist, an expert in human rights, and a commissioner with the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights will contribute to the debates within the organs of the OAS and will provide new perspectives to the promotion and protection of human rights, democracy, and international law. Your designation illustrates the priorities of the Colombian government at the OAS. The peoples of Colombia and Mexico have so many points of agreement. They're creative, hardworking peoples, entrepreneurial peoples with profound historical, cultural, and economic ties, and very proud of their lands and traditions. We share the day-to-day struggle to reduce marginalization, racism, discrimination, and social, economic, and development inequalities, as well as human suffering and the yoke that has been imposed by the so-called war on drugs, as well as illegal trafficking in arms, which feeds organized trafficking and leaves in grief many of our countries, a large part of the hemisphere. The points of agreement as between our presidents create an opportunity to work together and constructively in multilateral policies that allow us to overcome those common challenges and to continue to give impetus to regional integration based on dialogue, cooperation, mutual respect, and respect for international law, as well as the aims and principles set forth in the Charter of the OAS. Ambassador Vargas, my delegation has received with great hope the proposed Declaration on Support for Total Peace in Colombia that has been submitted by your Permanent Commission for consideration at the upcoming OAS General Assembly. You can count on my country's support for that declaration and the support of my delegation to work in all the different areas of the organization according priority to dialogue and consensus building as fundamental instruments of multilateralism for peace, sustainable development, and the defense of sovereignty in which Mexico believes so firmly. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
To Suriname.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On behalf of my delegation, I also would like to welcome the new ambassador of Colombia to the OAS. Colombia is sharing borders with South America, with Central America, and with the Caribbean. And I think he already gave us the impression of his outlook towards the whole continent and the hemisphere. And we welcome him with his great experience, and we are looking forward to work together with him on the different issues. Also on behalf of the members of the CARICOM group, I want to welcome him in this body. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Suriname. I now offer the floor to Canada.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, colleagues. It's nice to see everyone here. I must say, one of the many nice things about this organization is this tradition of welcoming new colleagues and new friends, I'm sure, as well. So let me, on behalf of the Canadian delegation, offer a very warm welcome to His Excellency Ambassador Luis Ernesto Vargas. A couple of points I wanted to make this afternoon. One is how pleased I think we all are to be joined by a colleague who's so deeply committed to the issues of the advancement of human rights and the consolidation of peace, and so well acquainted with the role that the inter-American system plays in those efforts. Canada and Colombia have a very long history of friendship and collaboration. Next year, we'll celebrate 70 years of diplomatic relations. Let me join as well with others who've indicated that they will be supporting the Declaration on Support for Total Peace in Colombia. Canada is pleased to be one of the co-sponsors of that resolution as well. We're looking forward, sir, to working closely with you on a number of issues: peace, human rights, climate change, gender equality, and supporting Venezuelan refugees and migrants. Bienvenido. Gracias.
Thank you very much, Canada. I now offer the floor to the United States.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ambassador Vargas, on behalf of the United States, I'd like to join with my colleagues in welcoming you to the OAS. The United States looks forward to working with you on many critical issues that face our region, which include democracy, justice, human rights protections, recovering from a global health pandemic, security and inclusive development, protecting the environment, and taking climate action. I know that with your strong diplomatic and legal skills, as well as your time on the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, these will serve you well in your time as the new representative of your country to this body. Again, we welcome you. We look forward to working with you.
Thank you, United States. We wish the new permanent representative of Colombia success in his new responsibilities. The next item on the agenda is the consideration of the draft declaration of solidarity with the Argentine people in view of the assassination attempt suffered by the Vice President of the Republic of Argentina, presented by the Permanent Mission of Argentina, to be considered by the General Assembly under item 27 of the draft agenda of the 52nd regular session. This draft declaration was distributed as document CP Doc 5813/22. I offer the floor to the delegation of Argentina for a brief presentation of the draft declaration.
Thank you, Chair. Just to express our thanks that we have 6 other fellow member states, Bolivia, Colombia, Honduras, Mexico, Peru, and Uruguay as co-sponsors. Welcome, and if they're welcome, and welcome to any others. And just to say that as we did not receive any objections or observations, that we have the consensus necessary to address this at the pertinent point in the Assembly. That's all.
Floor to delegations wishing to speak on this draft declaration. I recognize Bolivia.
Bolivia, you have the floor, please. Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you for the representative of the Republic of Argentina for the draft declaration of solidarity with the Argentine people in the face of the assassination attempt against the Vice President of Argentina, Cristina Fernández de Kirchner, to be considered by the General Assembly under item 27 of the 52nd regular session of the General Assembly. The President of Bolivia, Luis Arce Catacora, has publicly expressed his support for the Vice President of Argentina, Cristina Fernández de Kirchner. The Bolivian people have felt closely the attack or threat on the life of the second highest political leader. This is part of a systematic hate campaign against her that seeks to destabilize a legally elected, democratically elected government. Our countries are resolutely opposed to these attacks that would perturb the existence of a government that has lived in democracy for nearly 40 years. In this sense, Madam Chair, Bolivia, as well as other delegations, is joining as a co-sponsor of this resolution, and we hope to have it approved by consensus without any opposition, because there are several elements in this effort that would be of benefit to all of us for approval in the 52nd regular session that will be held next week in the city of Lima. Thank you, Chair.
There being no further requests for the floor, the Chair proposes that the Permanent Council agree on the draft Declaration of Solidarity with the Argentine people in view of the assassination attempt suffered by the Vice President of the Republic of Argentina. This draft declaration will be sent to the plenary of the General Assembly for its consideration. There being no objections, it is so agreed. The next item on the agenda is the consideration of the draft declaration, Support for Total Peace in Colombia, presented by the Permanent Mission of Colombia, to be considered by the General Assembly under item 26 of the draft agenda of the 52nd regular session. The draft declaration was distributed as document CP Doc 5816/22 Rev 1. I offer the floor to the delegation of Colombia for a brief presentation of the draft declaration.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Once again, in previous remarks, I already addressed this. The government of Colombia has made an absolute priority the search for total peace. But to transform Colombia into a country of total peace is not only the task of a government or of armed groups. Total peace is a much broader concept that involves all actors, and particularly civil society, that should not be passive but rather fully participatory. And additionally, the support of the international community of member states in the region is key. It's basic, and for this reason, we have presented for your consideration this draft proposal for the construction of a region of peace that would in fact extend to the rest of the Americas. The text that we are proposing on behalf of the government of Colombia has already been read, but I would express my thanks to those who have spoken in favor of this draft declaration. Argentina has already done so, but today Canada and Mexico have been so emphatic in expressing their co-sponsorship to this draft declaration. We place this before the plenary for the consideration of other representatives for approval and consideration at the General Assembly. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I now give the floor to delegations wishing to speak on this draft declaration. There being no requests for the floor, the chair proposes that the Permanent Council agree on the draft declaration, Support for Total Peace in Colombia. This draft declaration will be sent to the plenary of the General Assembly for its consideration. There being no objections, it is so agreed. The next item on the agenda is the consideration of the draft resolution, the security situation in Haiti, and hemispheric cooperation for the preservation of democracy and the fight against food insecurity, presented by the Permanent Mission of Haiti, to be considered by the General Assembly under item 21 of the draft agenda of the 52nd regular session. This draft resolution was distributed as document CP Doc 5817/22. I recognize the delegation of Canada.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Let me start by thanking our friend and colleague from Haiti and his mission for the hard work on this resolution. If we could, Madam President, we just ask that this item be deferred until tomorrow. That will allow us just a little bit of time to finalize some consultations. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Canada. The proposal on the floor is to have this matter deferred to the next regular session of the Permanent Council scheduled for 2:30 p.m. tomorrow. I now offer the floor to the delegation of Haiti for concurrence or otherwise. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. We draft resolution to be deferred for tomorrow. Permanent Council. Thank you.
Thank you, Haiti. Having heard the recommendation from Canada and the approval, the agreement, I should say, from the delegation of Haiti, the chair proposes that this item be deferred and considered at the next regular session of the Permanent Council scheduled for Thursday, the 29th of September at 2:30 p.m. It is so agreed. The next item on the agenda is the consideration of the draft resolution, the political and human rights crisis in Nicaragua, presented by the Permanent Missions of Canada, Antigua and Barbuda, Chile, Costa Rica, and the United States, to be considered by the General Assembly under item 20 of the draft agenda of the 52nd regular session. This draft resolution was distributed as document CP Doc 5818/22. I offer the floor to the proposing delegations for a brief presentation of the draft resolution. I recognize Canada, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I will be brief. Let me start by thanking, on behalf of the co-sponsors of this draft resolution, Antigua and Barbuda, the United States, Chile, and Costa Rica, the support that we've had so far. We did ask the text be submitted today and shared for broad consideration. The text is not yet closed, and we'd continue to welcome comments that delegations may have by Friday at the end of the day. And also invite delegations that may wish to add their co-sponsorship to please contact any of the 5 current proponents. Thank you.
Thank you, Canada. I now offer the floor to delegations who may wish to speak on this draft resolution, noting the information just provided by Canada. I note that there are no comments. And the chair notes that further consultations will take place. In this regard, The chair proposes that the draft resolution, the political and human rights crisis in Nicaragua, will be sent to the plenary of the General Assembly, with the recommendation that it be forwarded to the General Committee for its consideration. There being no objections, it is so agreed. The next item on the agenda is the consideration of the draft resolution, Women's Leadership for the Advancement of Gender Equality and Democracy in the Americas, presented by the Permanent Missions of Canada, Argentina, Chile, Costa Rica, Mexico, Panama, Uruguay, and the United States, to be considered by the General Assembly under item 25 of the draft agenda of the 52nd regular session. This draft resolution was distributed as document CP Doc 5803/22 Rev 1. I offer the floor to the proposing delegations for a brief presentation of the draft resolution. I recognize Canada.
Thank you again, Madam President. Again, briefly, let me start by thanking the delegations of Argentina, Chile, Costa Rica, Mexico, Panama, Uruguay, and the United States for co-sponsoring this resolution. It's a resolution that highlights the important work and commitments that have been done in the region on this topic, and we're grateful for that support, and also for all of those who've participated, I know very fully, in the informal negotiations that have taken place and have provided comments on the resolution. We've had very productive conversations, but have not yet been able to close this document, and so therefore would ask that it be sent to General Committee for further consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Canada. I now give the floor to delegations wishing to speak on this draft resolution. I see no requests for the floor. The chair therefore notes that further consultations are necessary. In this regard, the chair proposes that the draft resolution, Women's Leadership for the Advancement of Gender Equality and Democracy in the Americas, will be sent to the plenary of the General Assembly with the recommendation that it be forwarded to the General Committee for its consideration. There being no objections, it is so agreed. Esteemed colleagues, in 2019, the UN General Assembly declared September 28th as the International Day for Universal Access to Information in order to raise awareness of the importance of universal access to information. The OAS has played a key role in promoting the right of access to information and in creating and advocating for international standards and principles that guarantee access to information at all levels of the state, including the 3 branches of government. This was mainly through the adoption in 2010 of the Model Inter-American Law on Access to Information and the Inter-American Program on Access to Public Information in 2016. In that vein, at the request of the Permanent Mission of Uruguay, as coordinator of the OAS Group of Friends of Freedom of Expression and Journalism, today we will mark this observance. I am therefore pleased to offer the floor to the delegation of Uruguay.
Thank you, Chair. I'm having trouble with my eyesight, so I hope my eyesight works. This is a joint declaration in which Argentina, Brazil, Costa Rica, Chile, the United States, Honduras, Panama, Mexico, and Dominican Republic and Uruguay are seeking to move this document forward. It's a document that has matured somewhat. I must recognize, Chair, that there are still some aspects that are being studied by some of our dear friends, but they have the document and that is underway. What we could do, if you agree, we could move forward, and if there is some aspect in which a country may have a difference of opinion, we have tried to work on this in the last few days, and there are different readings of the regulatory and normative structures of each country, so it's difficult to reach a point of consensus for that reason. But what has been already shared, I think we have sufficient flexibility to continue working if necessary. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Uruguay. The chair notes the information which you have shared and encourages the group of friends to continue working on this document, this very important document marking freedom of expression and journalism. I recognize Canada.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I realize I've taken the floor a lot today, but I did want to just say a few words on this item as well. And first, to thank Uruguay for starting off the conversation this afternoon. I want to say a few words because I think this is an important issue. Many of us have talked about the extent to which freedom of expression really is a cornerstone of democratic society. It's an issue to which freedom of information and access to information is very much linked. For our part, we join with others in calling on governments to respect and to fulfill the right to freedom of expression, including to seek and to receive and to impart information. And there's a connection that I wanted to raise this afternoon with digital inclusion, which for us, and I think for others, means not only connectivity, but also digital literacy and skills, online spaces that are free from censorship, and also online safety. A lack of connectivity prevents people, especially women, especially indigenous people, and persons and groups in vulnerable situations from being able to fully realize their human rights and also the benefits that are provided by the use of internet and digital technologies. In 2022, Canada is chairing the Freedom Online Coalition, and we're trying in our best way to advance digital inclusion in order to raise awareness of the issue and to coordinate with others to shape the global governance agenda. We've had some regional consultations, have brought together a number of diverse stakeholders to discuss human rights challenges. What I particularly wanted to note was some of the key findings in the Latin America region from those consultations, which included concerns over spyware, disinformation, and online gender-based violence used to censor, intimidate, and silence citizens and public figures, including journalists, human rights defenders, and political opponents. These findings, they'll be available in English, French, and Spanish. They will feed into the new Ottawa agenda, which is a high-level set of recommendations for Freedom Online to be launched at a ministerial, likely in December. So again, Madam Chair, thank you for giving me the opportunity because I wanted to raise these points this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, Canada. There being no further requests for the floor, I suggest that the Permanent Council take note of the information shared by the delegation of Uruguay and the delegation of Canada and urges that the work continue on the joint declaration. If there are no objections, it is so agreed. The next item on the agenda is the presentation of the 2021 to 2022 activities report of the Committee on Administrative and Budgetary Affairs, CAP, by its chair, to whom I will now yield the floor. Mr. Chair, the floor is yours.
Muito obrigado, Senhora Presidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In my capacity as President or as Chair of the Committee on Administrative and Budgetary Affairs, which I was pleased to accept at the beginning of this year, and in preparation for the 52nd regular session of the General Assembly, I have the honor of presenting for consideration by the member states the report of the CAAP and the negotiations for the funding of our 2023 program. CAP had 13 formal meetings since November and no informal meetings to deliberate and to study the particular points on management of the OAS, including distribution of the budget prepared by the General Secretariat and the consideration of the budget proposals, as well as further detailed reviews submitted to working groups of this commission. In conclusion, all of these were considered carefully and of importance to the organization, but to better use our time, and as the report has already been distributed to all delegations, I'll be brief and highlight only the most recent distributions having to do with the budget ceiling. And after extensive reviews and consultations, CAP agreed to the ceiling for $82.88 million US, and the Secretariat prepared a report on the distribution of the budget, which together with the program budget of the organization for 2023 was reviewed in detail by the organization in these last weeks, in keeping with the methodology for negotiations proposed and approved in CAAP 3845, adopted on the 4th of August of this year. Madam Chair, CAP received expressions of support or modifications from Bahamas, Brazil, Canada, Colombia, the United States, Guatemala, Mexico, and St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and also from the chair of the working group for the review of OAS programs. And at all stages of the process, we had the broad participation of delegations, and at no time was any point presented by delegations not considered or reviewed. And I would underscore that at all times, consensus guided our actions. After 8 formal meetings and informal meetings, the CAP arrived at a complete agreement on all articles of the program budget of the organization for 2023, which includes the complete distribution up to the level on programs for the budget to be dispersed next year. And it is with gratitude to the ensemble of delegations here present that we can consider successfully concluded the work which we are presenting to you, Chair, for the program budget for the organization for 2023, which has been distributed as CP/CAAP 3845/22, revision 9. Madam Chair, by way of conclusion, I'd like to again express my thanks to the ambassadors, to the delegates of all missions for their positive contributions and for their involvement and participation over the course of these meetings and negotiations. Particularly, let me take this opportunity to thank the vice presidents, François Joubinville, and our friend and colleague, Carolina Vera, who returned yesterday to her country, Paraguay. As well, presidents of the working groups of the Commission, as well as the vice presidents of those working groups, our colleague Jason Fields and Nicolas. I thank all of them for the professionalism with which they carried out the work of this committee. We should also express And let me take the opportunity to say on behalf of all delegations, Ileana Navarro is to be congratulated for her work as for the CAP Secretariat, for her constant support, and for inspiring us with the best example of all of the qualities that an international civil servant should show. Finally, let me also express my thanks to the Secretary of Administration and Finance, Jan Anil, and her entire staff team, Javier Anaís and Sebastián Ordóñez, as well as Melissa Cosi, the Director of the Legal Affairs Department, as well as all areas of the General Secretariat who worked very closely with us in organizing the priorities to be considered by the CAP during this period. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Of the working groups. We also express gratitude to all members of the CAB for their hard work. The Bahamas, you recognize.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Please pardon me, I don't have a device that works. I don't know if that's by intent, but I'd like to take the opportunity with your permission, Chair, to make an intervention.
Could you speak a little more loudly, please?
My apologies, Chair. My device does not seem to be working, so forgive me for following back to the archaic approach of asking for the floor in this manner. With your permission, Chair, I'd like to make an intervention on behalf of the Bahamas.
I note your request, Bahamas. Would you allow us, please, to proceed? Does it have to do with the approval of the program budget?
Tangentially, yes. Again, I would not intercede with the approval of the budget. It is a matter of two additional resolutions that are contained within the presentation. So if we're talking about the omnibus and approving the budget, my delegation will not interfere with that process. So proceed, if you wish.
I thank you for the courtesy. As the chair of CAP has informed, the draft resolution program budget of the organization for 2023 contained in document CIPIC CAP 3845/22 Rev 1 was agreed to by the CAP at its meeting yesterday. Now, the chair proposes that the Permanent Council agree on the draft resolution program budget of the organization for 2023, document CP/CAP 3845/22 Rev 1, and transmit it to the plenary of the 52nd regular session of the General Assembly for its consideration. If there are no objections, it is so agreed. The chair also proposes that the Permanent Council take note of the annual report of activities of the CAP. If there are no objections, it is so agreed. Considering the request made by the Bahamas, we now offer the floor to the delegate of the Bahamas, the ambassador of the Bahamas.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And my delegation would like to thank the chair of the CAP and the vice chairs for a job well done. And Madam Chair, my delegation is only taking this opportunity to intervene in respect of two resolutions that were presented to the CAP for consideration. One was the measures to encourage the timely payment of quotas to the OAS regular fund. The other one was the discontinuation of the prompt payment discount. It is my understanding that the resolutions were presented yesterday, considered in CAP, and the conclusion is still fuzzy in the minds of my delegation as to whether or not these two resolutions are still open. After listening to the recording, it is still confusing to my delegation as to whether or not these two resolutions are open. And I'm wondering if I can get clarification on that and then follow up with a question. The reason it's fuzzy was there was a position in respect of agreement, and there was a position in respect of disagreement, and then there was a presentation, and my translation went out. I then joined and I asked for a clarification, and the clarification was that I can bring it back to the Permanent Council and ask for it to be considered within the Permanent Council. If that offer is still there, then my delegation would proceed. If the offer is not there, then my delegation would like to explore additional options. But I'd like a clarification, and I'm sorry I'm taking this opportunity to get that. It's just that I haven't gotten it very clear. And forgive me, Chair, through you, if I can inquire.
Thank you, Bahamas. I now offer the floor to Brazil.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'd like to thank His Excellency Ambassador Chet Namor for the observations and also for giving me this opportunity to clarify what we discussed. Madam Chair, I'd like to emphasize that consideration of the draft resolutions mentioned by His Excellency the Delegate of the Bahamas was not concluded by the COP such that there was no substantive decision either against or in favor. As chair of the CAP, it's not my role to impose on the committee decisions that don't emanate from the discussions among the member states. As I generally say, I was in this position that I was honored to be chosen for. I'm merely a mediator among the member states. In the case of those two draft resolutions, as well as in the case of other initiatives that the CAP considered in the course of the year, those discussions were not concluded, and they will be continued in future sessions of the committee, such that, were that the desire, I'd like to ask the legal department to please clarify whether it is open for the matter to be considered, because there's no conclusion in this regards. These issues from the standpoint of the budget should be considered as new proposals by the Permanent Council. For example, one of the ideas that did not go over so well was that to bring forward to this year the obligatory discussion that we have next year on the quotas. And that was the subject of 3 or 4 meetings of the CAP, to the point that up until the member states decided that wasn't the time to discuss it. And the same thing happened with the 2 proposals put forward by the honorable delegation of the Bahamas. In the informal meeting yesterday, several of the delegations said that they did not feel prepared, nor did they have instructions from their capitals to discuss the 2 proposals, and they preferred to leave them for after the General Assembly. So those are the clarifications, Madam Chair. Thank you.
I now recognize Antigua and Barbuda.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Our understanding of the procedure that should have been followed in the CAP yesterday is somewhat at variance with what the chair just expressed. In our experience, if resolutions presented that are intended for the upcoming GA refuse to garner the support in its committee, it is referred by the chair to the Permanent Council open. If it cannot be agreed in the Permanent Council, then it goes to the General Committee open. If it does not get agreement in the General Committee, then it comes to the plenary open. I am not sure if it is correct to say that if we introduce the resolutions today into the Permanent Council, it should be considered as a new item. It is not new. It was deliberated yesterday by the CAP and no agreement could have been reached. I would be grateful to receive clarification if our understanding of the situation is correct or incorrect. Thank you.
Thank you, Antigua and Barbuda. Given, I offer the floor to Brazil. Sorry, I offer the floor to Brazil.
Obrigado, senhora presidente. Digo na minha.
Thank you, Chair. Once again, as Chair of the CAP, I'd like to offer the floor first to Her Excellency Luzhelena Baños, and I would speak immediately thereafter. Thank you. Excuse me.
Mexico.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to support the comments by the distinguished representative of Brazil and chair of the CAP, whose work we would like to express gratitude for publicly. And this has been work that has been done very keenly in a difficult context. I would just say that based on Article 43 of the Rules of Procedure of the Permanent Council, we would not have any basis today for having a discussion here because it is a new issue that was not agreed upon for inclusion in today's agenda. And we would like for such complex issues to have serious instructions from our capitals. So we would like to put this forward for consideration, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mexico. I now offer the floor to Brazil.
Muito obrigado.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I would like, as chair of the CAP, to ask for the observations of the legal department on this question, please.
I now request the legal opinion from the Secretariat for Legal Affairs.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. From the presentation made by the Ambassador of Bahamas, I understand that they have presented 2 draft resolutions yesterday to the Committee on Administrative and Budgetary Affairs. This is a standing committee. Therefore, its work does not cease when the General Assembly comes around. These resolutions, from what I understood from the presentation, are still before the Committee on Administrative and Budgetary Affairs for consideration. Now, as regards the observation by the delegate of Antigua and Barbuda, that's different. She is making reference to the possibility of taking this issue into this period of sessions of the General Assembly, but that requires that the issue be included, or the matter be included on the agenda of the General Assembly. The agenda for the General Assembly is closed, and this subject is not on the agenda. The only way to include it on the agenda would be as an urgent situation for urgent consideration with a 2/3 vote at the outset of the General Assembly. But I understood from the presentation by the Ambassador of Bahamas that what he is seeking is that his resolutions continue to be considered by the appropriate body of the Permanent Council, which in this case is the Committee on Administrative and Budgetary Affairs. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Very much, Dr. Rigi. I offer the floor to the Bahamas.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I'd like to thank the delegation of Brazil in its capacity as a chair in offering the clarifications. And I'd also like to thank the legal secretariat in respect of the opinion that was just offered. I'm somewhat familiar with this process, and having seen it, my position is somewhat the same as the delegation of Antigua and Barbuda. Nonetheless, Madam Chair, it behooves me to understand that this is going to be considered a new agenda item if it is already incorporated in a current process. I will not belabor the issue as to whether or not it is CAP or whether or not it's the Permanent Council. The CAP reports to the Permanent Council. The matter is in CAP, and I'm now asking for the matter to be considered in the Permanent Council. Nonetheless, Chair, the deadline for presentations for the General Assembly for agenda items was August 5th. Chair, I'm not sure if that prescription was honored entirely. There were resolutions that came after August 5th. Notwithstanding, my delegation would not like to press the issue in respect of these two resolutions, such that these two resolutions will be the subject of ire given the current conversations surrounding them. We will allow it to be fully aired, fully ventilated, and discussed, and hopefully concluded. There is a forthcoming General Assembly in June. I served notice that these two items should be on that agenda for June. That is also not precluding the decision for the 2/3 vote at the General Assembly. In addition to that, I would like for the Secretariat to clarify if there were resolutions that came after August 5th. If such, then these resolutions, if they were to be considered new, would also receive equal provisioning and equal attention. Madam Chair, I would like to also request that if the opportunity presents itself, that the item in respect of the fiscal health of the Organization of American States be afforded some space and some opportunity for discussions at the General Assembly. But I will await clarifications in respect of whether or not there is a rule that applies to some and not to all. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Bahamas. I now ask the Secretariat for Legal Affairs to respond to those questions.
De acuerdo con el artículo 20 del reglamento.
According to Article 20 of the General Assembly Rules of Procedure, it says the preparatory committee at least 15 days prior to the beginning of the session shall adopt the agreement on the proposed agenda. This happened with 15 days lead time. The topics were included before those 15 days. What has been presented today are draft resolutions that have to do with matters already included in the General Assembly agenda. The problem with the topic proposed and the draft resolutions being discussed today is that the matter is not included. Therefore, in order to present a new topic and new resolutions on a topic that is not yet included in the agenda, there is a way to do so, which is Article 33 of the Rules of Procedure of the General Assembly, which say that once the regular session begins, matters, only urgent, important matters may be added to the agenda. Admission thereof shall require a vote of 2/3 of the member states. So the deadline was 2 weeks before October 5th. And what we have discussed today are draft proposals on topics already included. Those points have already been included by the preparatory committee. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Secretariat for Legal Affairs. The Bahamas, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. My delegation would like to reiterate its earlier remarks in respect of recognizing the leadership of the chair of CAP and recognizing the difficult circumstances under which he would have had to work, including working along with me. So, Chair, I do, and I heard the response from the legal department, and that type of qualification is very useful when we begin this process, not as we are at the end of this process. It's August 5th plus 15 days. And it's Article 33. My delegation will be so guided and so minded. We look forward to the General Committee, and we look forward to enjoying the General Assembly in Lima, Peru. And thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Bahamas. The chair notes the comments and the exchanges and determines that the two items will be discussed more robustly at a later date. Is that satisfactory to the delegation of the Bahamas, the proposing delegation? Thank you very much. Esteemed colleagues, in accordance with Article 28 of the Rules of Procedure of the General Assembly, we will now install the Style Committee for the 52nd regular session. In this regard, the Chair proposes the following countries to serve as members of the Style Committee for the 52nd regular session of the General Assembly: Brazil for Portuguese, Canada for French, United States for English, and Peru for Spanish. If there are no objections, it is so agreed. Distinguished representatives, we will now proceed to the last item, order of business. I beg your pardon. We will now proceed to the last item, other business. Before opening the floor to delegations that wish to bring any informative issues to the attention of this council, I wish to inform that tomorrow at 2:30 p.m., there will be the last meeting of the Permanent Council prior to the General Assembly. In that meeting, we will consider the reports on activities to the 52nd regular session of the General Assembly during the 2021-2022 term from the Inter-American Council for Integral Development, CD, the Committee on Hemispheric Security, and the Committee on Juridical and Political Affairs, including the corresponding draft omnibus resolutions. The Secretariat will be distributing the corresponding convocation and draft order of business shortly. I draw to your attention that yesterday the Secretariat distributed a notice regarding registration and identification badges for the General Assembly. Please be sure to review this document and take note of the information given that a security zone will be established around the perimeter of the Lima Convention Center starting on October 5th, and that only registered participants with an ID will be allowed entry. The floor is now open to delegations. I recognize Mr. Gustavo Tari.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I apologize to the distinguished representatives for taking a few additional minutes, but it's with such a long day as we've had today, it has to do with the human rights issue that I cannot but fail to mention. As many of you know, the Independent International Mission on the Fact-Finding Mission on Venezuela of the United Nations made public a report on the crimes against humanity that have been committed in my country. The conclusions of the Independent International Mission are clear. There's been a state policy, a deliberate state policy from the highest level authorities who gave orders to the officials of the counterintelligence and national intelligence services for the purpose of, and I quote the report, silencing, discouraging, and suffocating the opposition to Nicolas Maduro. The Independent International Mission has confirmed what we have been denouncing for years, providing the names of the different officials who have been responsible for crimes against humanity under a standard of reasonable grounds for believing it is thought that all of the persons mentioned have tortured or ordered that torture be applied or subjected to cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment, political dissidents, or their family members. All of this under the direct orders of Nicolás Maduro, Diosdado Cabello, Tariq al-Sab, and the ministers of defense, interior, and justice, who are considered the main artifices, and I quote once again, in the design, implementation, and maintenance of machinery at the service of repressing the dissidents. Close quote. The Independent International Mission speaks of weekly meetings among these authorities and the directors of the above noted repressive groups. The profiles of victims tortured, according to the Independent International Mission, also confirms that we are in the presence of a policy of the regime. These are dissident members of the military, persons who are critical of the usurpation, political leaders, workers of NGOs, especially human rights NGOs, and their family members and friends. The Independent International Mission confirmed that one of the objectives of this plan of torture is that it sets examples to intimidate other leaders or sow terror and thereby perpetuate the dictatorship. The Independent International Mission provides plenty of examples of torture. Now, none of the persons denounced in the reports have been investigated, much less punished. To the contrary, many have received awards and promotions. The Independent International Mission speaks of a system of incentives and rewards for those who participate in acts of torture, as well as punishments of those who refuse to do so. The Independent International Mission determined that serious human rights violations, those that have occurred in what is known as the mining arc in the south of the country, have been carried out in the context of illegal mining, where members of the security forces have arbitrarily taken the lives and liberty of indigenous members, dwellers of the area, and this has had, and imprisoned them, and this has had a very negative impact. There are groups called sindicatos, criminal groups, who with impunity violate the territorial limits of the indigenous peoples and promote illegal mining in the area. The Independent International Mission concluded that it has reasonable grounds to believe that the state authorities have systematically breached their obligations to prevent, investigate, and punish human rights violations in that region. The Independent International Mission noticed that Nicolás Maduro and the other high-level officials of his government, as well as the direct and indirect perpetrators, should be investigated, and it should be ensured that those investigations cover all perpetrators at all levels of the chain of command. This mission that I head up feels that this is essential in order to avoid appearances of justice. The perpetrators should be taken before courts that are genuine, serious, impartial, and in immediate fashion. I want to note that this is just a small sample of the content of these reports, and that is why we ask that the Secretariat transmit to the states the reports by the Independent International Mission, which we will forward to you soon. Thank you, Chair.
I see that there are no further requests for the floor. I now offer the floor to the Assistant Secretary General.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And just a piece of additional information. Yesterday we circulated a document, an information document with complementary information for the General Assembly, basically outlining a number of parallel activities that are being organized in Peru. So I'm asking delegations to please take note of them. These are not part of our formal calendar. Our calendar has been approved, but because some of them are some high-level events that will be taking place, I urge you to take a look at them so that you may plan accordingly. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Assistant Secretary General. There being no further business to consider, this meeting is adjourned.